Rita, get started. Yes.
All right. This is a day I've looked forward to for a long time. My name is Rita Maggart, and I have two very special guests today, Joyce Watkins and Jason Gishner. Jason is the executive director of the Tennessee Innocence Project, and he's going to explain to us all about what the Tennessee Innocence Project does. He's a veteran trial lawyer, and as a public defender has represented thousands of clients. He's an adjunct professor of law at Vanderbilt Law School, and this is what he says. He says he shares his commitment to justice with the next generation of legal professionals. We're just delighted that Jason could be here today with Joyce and help to tell her story. He's traveled all over the United States with her, big audiences and small audiences, law schools and conventions and everywhere, and us, to speak to us today and tell us about it. And then Joyce, my dear friend Joyce, she was born in Alabama, she grew up in Georgia, and she's traveled here today from Decker, Tennessee. So she's had a nice long drive this morning to get here. She's been my friend for over 30 years, and we met at the Tennessee Prison for Women. She was one of my first students in what we call the Creative Women's class. And she came to my class, and we have been friends ever since. Mm-hmm. Joyce spent 27 years incarcerated in the Tennessee Prison for Women. She'll share her story of survival, but the most important thing about Joyce, I have found, it's not that she was exonerated, but it's the life that she lives now. Amen. Today, she is sharing and caring and giving and following God's lead every day. So she's just a very special person, and I'm very privileged to be her friend. Plus, she's taught me way more than I could ever have taught her. Thank you, Joyce. And we're going to let Jason start with his telling us about, give us a backstory, Jason.
All right. Thank you, Rita.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for inviting us to be here today. So Joyce and I, we do this talk for folks sometimes. We're always honored to talk to people about what we do and about Joyce's story and her case. This is typically how we do this conversation. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about the Tennessee Innocence Project, who we are, what we do, tell you a little bit about wrongful convictions, and I'm going to give you some background about Joyce's case. Joyce not only spent 27 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit, Joyce is the first Black woman who's ever been exonerated in the state of Tennessee. And her story is pretty incredible. So I'll give you some backstory about it, and then Joyce and I will have a conversation. When Joyce and I first started doing this, it was more of a conversation. Now I just kind of say, Joyce, go, and she just talks for me. So the Tennessee Innocence Project is a nonprofit law firm. We represent innocent people all over the state of Tennessee who are locked up for crimes that they didn't commit. Tennessee is actually one of the last states in the country to have an innocence organization. A lot of people have heard of the Innocence Project and assume that it's a national project and we're, the Tennessee franchise of that. That's not how it works. Every state that has an innocence organization, and most states do, they're independent actors. There's a larger innocence network that we're all a part of, but we're our own thing. We're a standalone 501c3. We represent every client free of charge. And in the last 5 years, the Tennessee Innocence Project has exonerated 10 people who have served more than 300 years in prison for crimes that they didn't commit. On average, our clients spend anywhere from 27 to 30 years in prison before they get out. And most of our cases have some type of scientific or medical component to them, whether it's a DNA case, whether it's a medical case like Joyce's case, sometimes it's a fire science case. We have an office here in Nashville. We have an office in Memphis. We litigate cases all over the state of Tennessee. And we do 4 basic things. The main thing that we do is directly representing innocent people and fighting to bring them home. And we're in courtrooms all over the state doing that. The second thing that we do is policy work. So we're advocating at the state legislature and trying to get laws passed to prevent innocent people from going to prison, but also just to make the criminal legal system more fair and equitable than it is. The third thing that we do is re-entry work. We are big believers that innocence work is holistic work, and we don't just get people out of prison and say, see you later. When you are a client of the Tennessee Innocence Project, you're pretty much a client for life, which means that we help with everything from housing to employment to mental health care, whatever it is that you need. You know, obviously there's a lot of trauma that comes with going to prison for anything, but there's a whole other layer of it when you spend 30 years in prison for something you didn't do. So we have a team of people. We have a full-time social worker on staff that works with clients who are navigating the process to get exonerated and what that looks like. But then also we have a community of people who have been exonerated. She works with all of them individually and as a group. That community is really tight. Joyce and a lot of the other people that we've gotten out are, they're just really close friends, and we all get together kind of on the regular. And then the last thing that we do is education. And we speak at places like this all the time. We speak at churches, we speak at synagogues, we speak at schools, we speak to law firms and civil groups for a couple reasons. But the main one really is so people understand that wrongful convictions are really a thing. A lot of people assume that the criminal justice system always gets it right, that if somebody's convicted of a crime, they must have done it. And what I always start out by telling people is that our criminal legal system is run by people. It's run by human beings. And any system that's run by human beings is not perfect, and there's going to be an error rate. And there are the cases that you all hear about. I'm going to talk about Joyce's case in a minute, where there's bad actors, people who do things they shouldn't do. But sometimes there's cases where people just make mistakes. Sometimes we learn more about science than we knew 20 years ago, and we just get better, and we realize we got things wrong. And I don't know what that error rate is. There have been studies that have said 4%. There have been studies that have said 6%. I tell people all the time, let's just be conservative. Let's say it's 3%. Let's say that 97% of the time the system is getting it right. I don't think that's true for what it's worth, but let's just say that 97% of the time the system's getting it right. Anything that's any system run by human beings that has that high of a success rate, you'd say is working really well. The problem is that even if it is working that well at any given time in Tennessee, there's about 30,000 people locked up. So if the system is getting it wrong 3% of the time and there's 30,000 people locked up, that means there's 900 innocent people locked up, as we all gather here this morning. And there have only been 41 exonerations in the history of Tennessee. So we have a lot of catching up to do, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. And up until 2019, we didn't have a statewide organization doing this work. And there is a direct correlation between boots on the ground doing this type of legal work and innocent people coming home. There's no question about that. So that's a little bit about us, who we are, what we do. Let me tell you about Joyce's case, and then I'll get her up here because she's more interesting than I am. So in 1987, Joyce Watkins was living in Madison, Tennessee. She was in her late 30s. She had never been arrested for anything in her life. She was working a full-time job. She was in the process of adopting a baby. And she had a great niece who was 4 years old that was staying with a family member in Kentucky. And that little girl had been staying there over the summer. There was nothing atypical about that. That was something this family did. You know, the kids would travel around and stay with relatives for periods of time. The same little girl had stayed with Joyce before. But that summer, Joyce started getting phone calls from the person that the little girl was staying with saying, you need to come pick her up. You need to come pick her up. Now, Joyce worked a full-time job. She doesn't have daycare. She can't just drop everything and go get her. But then one particular week, the calls started getting more frantic. You need to come get her. You need to come get her. So Joyce calls little girl's mom, who lives in Georgia, and says, I'm getting these calls and I've got some concerns. What do you want me to do? So she says, go get her. So that night when she gets off of work, Joyce and her boyfriend, Charlie, drive up to Fort Campbell to pick up the little girl. They get her back to Nashville. It's the middle of the night. And pretty quickly, Joyce realizes something is wrong. As Joyce goes to put her to bed, she sees that the little girl has bleeding in her underwear, and she's just not acting right. So Joyce, again, does what you would expect a reasonable person to do in that situation. She immediately calls the girl's mom. And everything I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell it to you as a story, but this is all documented 1,000 different ways. So Joyce calls the little girl's mom and explains what the situation is, and again says, what do you want me to do? Mom says, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to drive to Nashville, put her to bed, and we'll figure this out in the morning. So that's exactly what Joyce does. She puts her to bed. Morning comes. Mom has still not arrived. Little girl is still not acting right and cognitively seems to be worse. Joyce has a sister who lives down the block. So sister comes over, talks to the little girl too, to kind of get a second opinion on what's going on here. And they're both in agreement that something's wrong. Joyce is not waiting for mom to get there. Joyce immediately takes the little girl to the hospital. So she gets to the hospital and they realize that there is some sort of significant issue. Yes, she does have some type of superficial genital injury that they don't know what it is, but they start running tests, and more importantly, what they see is that she has a brain bleed. She has a subdural hematoma, and it's critical. So they intervene and they do everything they can to try to save her, but they're not able to, and she dies within a day of a brain bleed. Immediately, an investigation begins, and the family from Georgia is there. Joyce and Charlie are there. The police are involved, and they're interviewing everybody. And nobody is looking at Joyce or Charlie. I mean, the little girl was in their custody for a total of 9 hours. She was asleep most of that time, and Joyce is the one who took her to the hospital. So nobody thinks that they had anything to do with it. The mom doesn't think Joyce had anything to do with it. She said Joyce called me as soon as she got home, in the middle of the night. And then they conduct the autopsy, and everything changes. So the people who do the autopsy, the medical examiner, were a husband and wife team in Nashville who have subsequently both been stripped of their medical licenses in Tennessee. One of them was prosecuted for botching dozens of autopsies. But they conduct an autopsy and they say, well, we looked at the brain slides, and is anybody in here a doctor? All right. I always ask that in advance because I want to make sure that I'm getting it right. I'm pretty sure I'm getting it right, but I always check. So they look at the brain slides, and she says, I know that this is an injury that had to have happened in the period of time that the little girl was with Joyce and Charlie. And she says, the reason I know that is because I was looking for a specific type of cell, which is a healing cell called a histiocyte. And because that healing cell didn't show up on the brain slides, this tells me it's a very acute injury. It had to have happened within this 9-hour window. And that's it. Everybody believes that. So they go to trial, and the prosecutor argues that there's medical evidence that they did it. They're the only ones who could have done it. The prosecutor then argues that he believes that this little girl was raped and murdered in Joyce's apartment, and her, physically assaulted that led to her death. And he argues that Joyce washed the bed sheets to destroy the evidence of the rape that had happened. And Charlie they're both put on trial together. Charlie has no criminal record either. Charlie's Joyce's boyfriend. They've been together for a while. They work together. Charlie is a widower. He has raised his own children on his own. They're either in high school or grown. And their lawyers don't put on any medical evidence to contest what the medical examiner is saying. They're both convicted. They both get life sentences. So the two of them both try to fight these charges over the years. They're both in for 27 years. Charlie passes away from cancer before he ever gets out. Joyce is paroled in 2015, largely because the mother of the little girl continues to fight for Joyce's parole for all these years. And in 2019, when the Tennessee Innocence Project came along, Joyce came to us, told us her story, asked us if we would represent her. And it was a medical case. So we started digging into the medicine. And very quickly, we realized that the medicine was just all wrong. So the doctors we began working with, one doctor is named Adele Lewis. She's the chief forensic pathologist for the state of Tennessee. So she almost always works with the prosecution, not with the defense. And we began working with a pediatric neurologist from Vanderbilt Children's Hospital named Shilpa Reddy. And what we very quickly discovered that they should have been able to discover back in 1987 is that this cell that supposedly this doctor didn't see that was the basis for the timing of the injury, the histiocyte, doesn't go to that part of the brain. It wouldn't have been there in 9 hours, in 9 days, in 9 weeks. It's just not a thing. It was total junk science that was the basis for the timing of the injury. The other thing that we did is we went back and looked at the vaginal slides, which we talked about at their trial, and we saw all sorts of healing cells. And we were able to prove definitively that those injuries happened days before Joyce and Charlie were ever with this little girl. The next thing we did is we did a public records request, and we got all of the original police files, and buried within those files that had never been turned over was the report when the police came to Joyce's house to collect evidence, and the bed sheet that was argued that she destroyed to hide the evidence of the rape was not in fact washed. It was there with all of the other laundry, and nothing had been altered at all. Joyce had welcomed everybody into her home. Joyce, by the way, gave 5 interviews without a attorney, has passed 9 polygraphs, and cooperated in every single way possible. So, and there's more to it, but those are the basics. We take all this information, we go to the district attorney's office, they do their own investigation, they all agree that Joyce and Charlie are innocent. We go back to court, and we have a hearing, and both of the convictions are overturned. Charges are subsequently dismissed. They're both exonerated. Charlie's family's there, Joyce's family's there. And then I'll tell you one other thing about what happened at the hearing, and then I'm going to have Joyce come up and tell her part of it, is that there had been some tension over the years between Charlie's kids and Joyce, for no other reason than Charlie got caught up in all of this because he didn't want Joyce to have to drive out to Kentucky by herself at night. You know, had it not been for that, he would have had nothing to do with any of this. And they obviously didn't blame her for what happened, but there had been some tension over that. What they learned at the hearing when we went to court in 2021 was that in the middle of the trial, the prosecutor took Joyce in the hallway and said, you know, if you just go in there and testify and say Charlie's the one who did this, you can have a year probation and be done with all of this. And Joyce saw the way it was going. She had heard the testimony, and she just said, no, I'm not going to put an innocent person in prison to free myself. And she went back in and took her life sentence. And they didn't know that. And that kind of changed everything. And she's had a very close relationship with all of them ever since. So that's the background. That's Joyce's case. And then what I'm going to do is have Joyce come up, and me and her will have a conversation. And then let me say this too, jump in at any point if you've got questions, if you want to ask stuff. Yes, sir.
How old was the little girl?
She was 4.
4.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
The people who had her beforehand, were they ever investigated?
So at the time, they were not investigated properly. I didn't get into the details, but there's a whole lot that happened in Kentucky that we learned about afterwards. You know, there had been abuse allegations. There had been all sorts of problems with what was going on there. Safe to say, whatever happened to this little girl, there is someone who knows about it, who's never come forward and talked about it and let Joyce sit in prison for 27 years. So there was somewhat of an investigation, and there's still people that are actually trying to investigate it. You know, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. You know, it's 35 years old trying to solve a case. You know, it was hard enough for us to prove that Joyce didn't do it. Now going back and trying to prove what actually happened, particularly when people aren't willing to talk, is really hard. So Joyce, come on.
Sure. You know that?
So like I said, we used to do this more of a Q&A, but now Joyce Watkins, go.
Oh, I'm Joyce. Thanks for the invitation, for inviting me. And I thank Jason for me calling that, and, you know, come on, go with me. So we're here. But I spent 27 years and 2 months in prison for a crime that I did not commit. It was my great niece, and I did what anybody would do, a mother or whoever. Took her to get medical help and end up in prison for the 27 years. I lost everything I had. I was buying a house, going to adopt a little girl. I was working a full-time job. Has never been late on a job, never missed a day. You know, I was doing good until this happened. And I think I was immediately accused of what happened. No one wanted to listen to me or hear nothing I had to say. So, you know, and I had, 4, 5 different attorneys that didn't do anything to try to help. Well, one of them now, you know. One that tried to help me out the 4 or 5 that I had, but it was like a family thing. And I just did what I thought was right. You know, I don't care whose kid it had been, I would still took them to the doctor. Because anybody in their right mind would have said, hey, look, no, we go to the doctor. So that's what I did. I don't have any animosity or any anger against anybody. I never had, because when you're innocent, you don't hold grudges or whatever. So for 27 years, I had to live not as a human being or a person at time, but I survived in there by prayer, attending churches, classes. And my niece, she fought with the parole board for all of those years, you know, for them to release me. So finally, I guess they got tired of her acting the way she was. She was in the army, you know, they got that attitude or whatever so they got tired of her and they just said, okay, we'll, you know, give up parole. So a couple of months I went back and I got parole. I got parole October the 15th, 2015. And I had started fighting to get my name clear, those charges dismissed because I was innocent. My niece, her family did the same thing to help me get that done. And I heard about the Innocence Projects, and I went to them, and I told them what happened, and I asked them would they help me to prove my innocence. And I was told, well, we'll look into it, see what we can do. So they moved, and I didn't hear anything, so I found them. I talked to them, and they had moved again. I found them, and the only person they ever had to walk in there, the walk in, I walked in. And I told them what happened. And I just explained it to them. I said, look, you gotta help me. Most of my family's passed on. They took my family, but they're not gonna take my life. So they helped me, and I had to go and take polygraphs after polygraphs. I think I took around 10 or 12, but we only got like eight or nine.
9 of them, yeah.
Yeah, I passed every last one of them. So the man that gave them to me, he said something is wrong. Nobody, he's been on that job for 30-something years. He said he's never had anybody come, you know, pass that many polygraphs. He said, well, I don't believe you did it, because this just don't happen in real life. So we got that evidence, you know. They talked to Jason. My parole officers, they talked to Jason. They didn't believe, you know, me being the person I am and the way I talk to people and treat people. No one believed it, but they was willing to help me prove my innocence. So they saw that I wasn't doing anything or getting in any trouble or anything. I've never run with anyone. I've always been like work 12 or 16 hours a day, 6, 7 days. I was always in Sunday school, church, whatever was going on, I was there. And no one understood that, you know, how could they do that? But there were a DA that wanted to have a third term, which he didn't win. And he wanted me to turn state on this man. I was brought up to do the right thing about things. So when he asked me, I said, no, I send no innocent person to prison. For what? What am I gonna get? So we got charged together, and his family, like Jason said, they didn't care for me because they didn't know what had really happened in the court. So after we got exonerated, the charges dropped, you know, things changed. So we have a good relationship now. I talk to them. One of his sons, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, one of his sons passed away. His daughters, you know, I talk to them every now and then. And as far as me being out of prison, that's the best thing that could have happened. I picked up where I left off, Sunday school, church, you know. I don't have that many family members to visit. I went to prison. I had 12 or 13 aunties and uncles, 40 some nieces and nephews, 4 brothers, 1 half brother, 3 sisters. So now I'm only left with 2 sisters and a few nephews. And we visit each other. I visit them, you know, they think Jason owned the thing that ever lived on this earth. But it was hard before I got anything done. But I thank God that I was able to get someone to help me prove my innocence. And I'm glad to help the organization, whatever I can do to help them. I have been questioned, why do you do it? Or why aren't you tired? He won't let me. I don't get tired. I don't care how far I have to drive or how long it takes me to get there. I'm always willing to help the organization any way I can. And before I walked out that prison, I asked God to put it in my heart to forgive everybody who said anything or had anything to do with me going to prison. I asked Lord to put it in my heart to forgive them. And I've forgiven everybody. I don't have anything against them.
I have not.
I don't have anything against them. You know, it's how can you smile like you do when you've been done like you've been done? Okay, that's behind me. I can't start having strokes and heart attacks and being stressed out, high blood pressure and all of that. It's over. And I thank God for it. But I forgive everybody, you know. They should say he don't, but that's one question I always ask, how can you keep smiling? They don't serve the same God I do. That's why I keep smiling. And I always, whatever, when he called me and I say, before he can get it out of his mouth, I say, okay. It doesn't matter, okay. Just tell me what time and when, you know. It was hard, but I thank God that it's over with now. And we go everywhere and speak. Like I said, all he has to do is call me. And it's where and what time. So, you know, I'm just so thankful and I'm so grateful how these organizations have helped me. It happened, it shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. It was all because somebody wanted something on a resume. So I've had the state to apologize to me, everybody but him. I think he talked to Jason. But, you know, I thought, okay, well, then I forgive that man. But it's life now is great. I can get up and go to Sunday school, church on Sunday, through the week, fishing. I have this one lady, she have to have a blood transfusion. I take her. Another one, I go get some medicine, you know, just something all the time. I just stay busy all the time doing something. I don't guess my little hand be still for some reason, but I make a lot of stuff to be auctioned off at the gala. I makes quite a bit of stuff that sells, you know, well to help out. I get Social Security, full Social Security. I just, you know, just enjoying life where I couldn't. I missed 27 years and 2 months. So you know, I just do the best I can now, but I will never forget this man here. Never. Sometimes I say something to him, he said, like little kids, take it. But I will never forget him. This is my friend and my attorney.
How did you get back on your feet financially when you got out? Was there any restitution from the state? Or
No, no.
You want me to tell them about how that works?
Oh, the governor, I've been waiting 4.5 years for him to sign my paper. He has not signed anything.
So Tennessee, this is always the first question we get asked. So Tennessee actually has a statute that says if you've been wrongfully convicted, you're entitled to compensation up to $1 million, which is not enough money for 27 years taken away from you, but is life-changing money that would help her a whole lot. And the way that you get that is that in most states, if you've been found innocent in a court of law like Joyce is, you can go right to the Board of Claims in the state and they give you compensation. That's not how it works in Tennessee. In Tennessee, even when you've been found innocent in court like Joyce, you still need something called a certificate of exoneration that is signed by the governor, which is the equivalent of a pardon. So the process to get that is that we immediately after Joyce was found innocent and her conviction was overturned, we applied for a certificate of exoneration in January of 2022. The first step in that process is you have to have a hearing, which is like a mini trial before the full parole board. We didn't get that until 2024. We had a hearing before the entire parole board, which are all political appointments by the governor. And the board unanimously found Joyce was innocent and recommended that the governor sign a certificate of exoneration. The governor has taken no action on that since 2024. He has never signed it. And because of that, Joyce cannot go to the Board of Claims to seek compensation. So that's been sitting on his desk for 2 years. And well, 24 is when got through the board. As a result of that, we drafted legislation to change the process for how this works, to cut the governor out of the process. We've been working on that for 2 legislative cycles now. We're close. We actually got the votes to pass it, but the governor didn't put the funding in the budget for it because he doesn't want us to pass the law. So that's where we are on that. I am optimistic that we will get this law changed within the next few years. But Joyce and every other client we've represented who has been exonerated, not one of them has gotten a penny from the state for what has happened to them.
So could I ask, so I cannot imagine the pain and suffering that you endured all these years in prison, knowing that you were innocent. So my question is, you mentioned that you prayed, and that's, of course, the first thing any of us can and should do in a situation. And at the same time, I'm curious whether there was anything else, either biblically or not biblically, that helped you endure during this 27 years.
After I got out,
I'm sorry?
While you were in.
while I was in,
Yeah.
it wasn't easy.
Hmm.
I promise you, it was not easy.
Yeah.
I stayed to myself, you know, like I said, I attended a lot of classes. I went to Rita for women's building women's. I learned a lot. There were a few more classes that I went to, you know, but I refused to let my mind get corrupted over what happened. So when I got out, I had prepared myself for what if,
Okay.
because we live in a what if world. You know, what if this happened or what if this don't happen? So when I got out, I was put on a sex offender register. I could not leave home before 6 o'clock in the morning. I had to be in the house by 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I went fishing or something, if there were any kids, teenagers or whatever there, I had to leave. If I was in my home and kids run across the yard, you know, I had to closed the curtains, just like wasn't nobody, just like I didn't exist.
Right.
It wasn't easy.
Mhm.
I had a certain time to go to the grocery store. When I went to my doctor visits, I had to let my parole officer know, but one day he just come by and told me, don't come back to the office. They're not gonna treat me like that. So I was supposed to leave Franklin County unless I let him know. But I did inform all of them, don't call me, don't look for me, don't ask about me, because I will be going to Nashville to talk to people about proving my innocence. And that's what I did. But I had no problem after about 3 months because they see that they told me I didn't act like somebody who had committed a crime. And they had been in this business for years, so I guess they know, you've been around a person, you know whether they did anything or whatever.
Sure.
But it wasn't easy in prison. My life only got better when I got exonerated and the charges was dropped.
Mhm.
But it was a hard thing to endure, but I refused to let my mind go on account of what happened.
Yeah.
Because when Joyce got out too, she paroled in 2015 and she was exonerated in January of 2022. Almost everybody who we represent is in prison, typically serving a life sentence. It's very unusual for us to take a case, honestly, just from a resource and bandwidth perspective, for somebody who's not locked up. But because Joyce was on the sex offender registry, because she was convicted of rape, she was free, but she wasn't free, right? I mean, her whole life was micromanaged in ways that were ridiculous, times 1,000 because she didn't do it. So that was the main reason that we agreed to take Joyce's case in the first place, was because she was out of prison, but her life was just still really hard and really bad because of this life sentence that they had put on her for something she didn't do.
So your experience in prison, I would say, was a true example of a test of faith. And I think of the Israelites in the Babylonian captivity for 70 years, where you were close to half of that. And they kept asking God, how long, how long? And they had to have faith. And then Joseph gets put in prison for rape that he did not do. And he comes out of prison and he does wonderful things from that point on. And I don't know how Joseph didn't come out bitter, but that is faith.
You gotta have faith. If you don't have faith, you don't have anything to hold on to.
Right.
And I had that faith. I went in with faith and I come out with faith. And I still have a lot of faith. And that's one question a lot of people ask me. I've had one guy say, where did you get that faith? I said, well, you got it too. You just don't know how to use it. But you got it too. And I have a lot of faith. A lot of faith. See, whatever. On Sundays, I'm in Sunday school and church. That's my priorities right there.
Good.
So I live by those two things.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions back to the DA and then of course the governor. To me, it sounds like, and I don't catch everything that I'm hearing, but it sounds to me like it's more of an economic issue. You can't get the signature from the governor for exoneration because he's looked at the budget and can't agree to it because that would be so much more money out of his budget for state dinners. And so it sounds like, and you may have already done this, right? But if you involve the media and the whole story to be presented to the public.
So, yes, we have come at this every way we know how. I mean, he's been lobbied by so many people in his party on this issue. I mean, her story's been on CBS Sunday Morning. We've been in People Magazine. We've been in CNN, right? I mean, this has been. He's well aware of it. I don't think pressure is going to do it at this point. I mean, he's in his last term. He's leaving in December. So there's part of me that is optimistic he will do the right thing on the way out the door, but I don't know. And I don't know if it's a money reason. He's never been willing to sit down with me and have a conversation about it, despite trying. She has a lot of friends in the state legislature on both sides of the aisle that have been pushing hard for this and continue to. So I still have some cautious optimism that something is going to happen this year. But I don't know. We'll wait and see. If it doesn't, then, we'll go talk to the next governor about it. Yes, ma'am.
How does your organization get funding?
Oh, that's my favorite question. There's really three different ways. So the first way is people who support us and just donate and believe in us. So a large chunk of the money we raise every year is just from monthly donors, individual donors. We host events. We have a big gala every year that we raise a lot of money at. So we're just out in the community, and Nashville has really had our back since day one, which I'm very grateful for. The second way is through foundations and grants, whether they're large national foundations or family foundations. That makes up about 40% of where our money comes from. And then historically, we've had support from the Department of Justice through a federal grant as well. But federal funding right now for nonprofits is very chaotic and uncertain. We had a grant that ended last year. We were lucky in the sense that we were one of the nonprofits that were able to keep our grant. It wasn't taken away from us. I think that's due to a combination of good stewardship on our part and doing the things we were supposed to do with the money, but also politics-wise, some states, depending on whether they were red or blue, got to keep their grants and didn't. So that had something to do with it as well. But that grant expired and it didn't come back this year. And that we took a big hit in our budget because of that. But we sort of knew that was going to happen, so we planned for it. But that's basically it. It's people who support us and donate, come to our events, come to our gala, and then foundations and grants. And we don't generate any revenue because we represent every single person free of charge. So every year we basically have to start over and raise what the budget is for the year. And I've got 2 offices, 13 full-time staff, and we're always looking to grow because it very much is the case that the more people we get in the game doing the work, the more innocent people we can bring home. Yes, sir.
How many people are you working with now? How many?
So actively, we're litigating about 12 cases right now, but there are other cases that are under investigation that we're working on that we don't publicly talk about those cases. And then at any given time, there's a significant wait list of people who have applied to us. We get anywhere from 150 to 200 applications a year. We try to work through them as fast as we can, but it takes us about 9 months to work up a case before we take somebody on as a client, because we're always trying to answer 2 questions. Do we believe the person is innocent, and do we believe that there's a legal pathway for us to do something about that? Which means we do all of the work on the front end, reviewing all of the records, the public records requests, working with experts, going to crime scenes, interviewing witnesses, all that stuff, basically working up a cold case. We do all of that before we take somebody on as a client.
You must turn down a lot of applicants as well.
We do, and for various reasons. Sometimes it's because it's not a case that would be applicable. We only do actual innocence cases, which means that you are convicted of something you did not do. Now, there are some people that are legally innocent, right? They were pulled over by the police when they shouldn't have been, and they had drugs in the car, right? Those people should have good representation too. That's just not what we do. So we don't do like self-defense cases where it's this person's word versus this person's word. And a lot of these decisions that we make are resource decisions, right? These cases take a long time. We got her case done about 1.5 years, which is lightning, right? Some cases take 4 years. We had a case that took, we wrapped up a case earlier last year that was 8 years. One of our lawyers had been working on it before the Tennessee Innocence Project even existed. So we're very cognizant of the fact that if every case we say yes to, that means our team is going to be committed to that case for years. And if we say yes to a case where we don't realistically think we can help the person, that means we don't have the resource to help somebody else who we can. So we have to make hard decisions sometimes about cases that we don't take, even though we would like to take more than we do.
Has science made a difference in the DNA and those things?
Yeah.
Has that been a game changer?
Yeah, for sure. And it gets better all the time. The law hasn't caught up to the science in terms of the law respecting the science as much as it should. So we often have procedural fights about bringing new scientific evidence back into court because we're caught up in the legal quagmire of it. Whereas the new science that develops, or someone might say, well, you argued, this medical issue at trial. Well, the trial was 25 years ago, and the medical community thinks totally different about this issue now. Like shaken baby syndrome is a good example of that, right? People were convicted under medical theories related to shaken baby syndrome, which have been totally debunked. And it can be very hard to get back into court to revisit medical issues that we know more about now. So that's always a challenge. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm gonna say, I hate to cut this off right now, but some of us need to get to church. They are willing to stay and answer some more questions if you would like to stay to ask some more questions. So we appreciate that.
Sure.
But Skipper has a prayer
Sure.
for us as we close.
We're just grateful for Joyce and Jason being with us today to share the heartbreaking story of the wrongful conviction and the horrible consequences of the deprivation of your freedom for all these years and subsequently the things she's been through. But we're also grateful for the inspirational story of your faith, forgiveness, and redemption.